to the Tangerine Knits podcast. My name is Ichi, and this is going to be episode 2 of the podcast. First, I just wanted to say thank you to everyone who watched my last episode and reached out and commented. I truly had so much fun reading your comments, and it was really nice, partly because I truly didn't think anybody was going to see my previous video, let alone comment and reach out to share your experiences. It feels so nice to feel like I'm joining this knitting community online, and I'm super excited to share more with you about what I've been working on since the last episode. So it's mid-December right now, and the holidays are almost upon us, so we got our tree going. And I also have a little Santa wall hanging that I made. I can share a little bit more about that after I finish my knitting objects, because it's actually a crocheted object and not knitting. I also didn't do a full introduction in my previous video. Like I said, I just didn't think anybody was really going to see it, besides my mom. So just to give you a little bit more background about me, I mentioned already that I'm currently living in Virginia. Before that, I lived in the San Francisco Bay Area. And so I think moving back on the East Coast, I have more opportunities to wear sweaters and all of that. So it's pretty exciting to get to hand knit some of them myself. Outside of knitting, I work full-time. I am a bioengineer by training, but I currently work at a software company for life sciences research. All right, so without further ado, I'm going to jump into my finished objects for this episode. And the first one is going to be the garment I'm wearing right now, which is the step-by-step sweater by Handmade by Florence. During the last video, this was a work in progress, and I had finished the body and I think half of one sleeve. And this is knit using the Noro Miyabi yarn in the colorway 04. It is a wool and cashmere blend. It's primarily wool and a small percentage of cashmere. It is a self-striping yarn. The original pattern called for an Aran weight yarn. I believe it's Drops Nepal. And for this garment, I used just one strand of the Noro Miyabi. So I did end up sizing up 2 sizes in order to get the measurements that I wanted. I talked a bit about the pattern last time, so I won't go into great detail today, but it is a free pattern by Handmade by Florence. It was written with a complete beginner in mind, and she even has a really long video to demonstrate every single step of the way for making a sweater like this. At the same time, she offered some modifications that help improve shapes without introducing too many complicated techniques. So she had a German short row shaping option, which I did to make the back a little bit higher than the front, the back neck. And she also had an option for the folded collar. I ended up going with the funnel neck, but the modification I made was a tubular cast on instead of the long tail cast on because I wanted a more finished look. And I think in the pattern, she wanted to make sure that no complicated techniques are included. So the pattern just called for a long tail cast on. In the last episode, I also mentioned that I impulse bought this yarn because it was on sale at my local yarn store, but I regretted the choice at the time because I didn't think the tones are what I usually go for. I thought it was a little bit too cool toned. And thank you to all of you who reached out in the comments and were really encouraging about this color choice and how it actually does complement my complexion. And now that I've knit it up, I actually am really happy with the color, especially when I realized what it reminded me of, which is kind of like winter woods in twilight. So I live in Virginia. We are nested in the Blue Ridge Mountains. And so right now the leaves kind of have fallen off the tree. So if you look into the distance at the mountains, you have a couple of layers of color. So first layer is the woods that are closer to you, and they're basically pretty brown, kind of like, this color. And as you get farther into the woods and the mountains, they start to take on this bluish hue, hence the name Blue Ridge Mountains. And so that kind of, fades into some of these other like lighter browns, or even this like grayish color. And then I think at twilight, when the sky turns from like a blue to a bluish purple, or like right after sunset, maybe that's actually dusk. Around that time, I feel like the gradients in the sky and the landscape is kind of reminds me of this color palette, which makes me feel really in sync with my environments when I wear this sweater. So that was pretty cool. I think one of the reasons maybe I wasn't so drawn to this colorway is that maybe it is just a little bit more fitted towards winter, and now it is winter. It's awesome. But when I had purchased the yarn, it was still full on autumn mode, and the landscape was a lot more warm. So maybe that's why I felt a little bit apprehensive about the colorway. But now that I have it, I think it's very cozy, and I think it's a great little winter sweater. The color is also pretty wearable, I think. One of the other colorways I was deciding between when I was at the store was a lot brighter, and I think it would have been nice as well, but this just is more tonal and neutral almost, even though it is still self-striping. The other note I wanted to make about this yarn is during the last episode, I mentioned that I wanted to make the sleeves match or have the sleeves be symmetrical. I know that people have different preferences, and at the time I also said I wasn't going to bother making sure the sleeves matched. But as I knitted it up, I just got it into my head that I actually think I would prefer for them to match. And they're not exactly the same, but generally you can see that the colors are... the order of the stripes are still the same. At the cuff, they start to get a little bit mismatched because I think the length of each section of the stripe is not identical between yarn skein to yarn skein, which is understandable. So actually, if you look back at my footage from my previous video, when I had first knit this sleeve, I think it was this sleeve, I just had such a large section of brown, and when I was knitting the other sleeve, the brown section was a lot smaller. And so I thought about whether it mattered to me to rip back the sleeve and make it relatively match. And I decided that I just didn't want one sleeve to have like such a large stripe and then the rest of it be mismatched. So I did rip back and reknit the sleeves, and I did go through the trouble of making sure that the sleeves matched. And ultimately, I think it may have been more trouble than it's worth. Towards the end, I was basically running out of yarn. I couldn't just leave sections that I've spliced out unused. I really needed to go back and use those sections as well. I didn't have so much excess yarn. And so there was a lot of splicing involved to make sure that the colors sort of blended together. Like over here, I used a couple of different strands of gray that I had ripped out from earlier parts of the yarn skein. And ultimately, when you look at it, it looks pretty well blended, but making the sleeves match is not super straightforward. I think I would be maybe interested in using a self-striping yarn again for a sweater. I definitely would like to use those for socks, but I think for a sweater, I might lean more towards just color work or maybe a tonal yarn where you don't have to worry too much about making the stripes match. But that's probably just me being a little bit of a perfectionist. And, if the sleeves didn't match, it wouldn't have been the end of the world. But I like it how I like it. And so here we are. And also I will say, I think I knit the sleeves a pretty perfect length. I have pretty short arms, so most of my store-bought clothing have really long sleeves, and I always just really hate that. And so when I knit my own sweaters, I'm pretty gung-ho on not making the sleeves too long. I think some of my prior sweaters, the sleeves are not too short, but still a little bit shorter than I like because I want to leave room for having the sweater grow during blocking. And my previous sweaters didn't quite grow as much as I thought they would, so the sleeves are just a tad shorter than I would have ideally prefer. But these I think are quite perfect. It's long, but it doesn't drown my hands. All right, I think that's all I have to say about this finished object. The next finished object that I want to show is my first pair of socks. So I blocked only one of them. So this is the one I blocked. It looks quite nice. And I don't have a sock block or anything. There's no lace designs in this sock that really needs to be opened up. So I just washed it with wool wash and laid it flat to dry on a surface. And I think it still looks quite nice and blocked. The other sock it's not blocked, so it's not going to look like very much on camera. I knit this using Knitted Wit Sock yarn in the color Pomo Basket. I found it on sale at my local yarn store. This is technically an acquisition since last video, so I'll show that. And the yarn looks like this. It really I was so drawn to this yarn because I love these warm tones, and it was on sale, so I was like, oh, how perfect. Can't pass up on that. And it has these warm browns, oranges, and also little flecks of purple, which you can kind of see. It's not super obvious, but it does add to the dimension of the color. So I'm really, really, really happy with this fabric. The pattern, it's just a vanilla sock. I use the Summerly Design School of Sock pattern, but I also watched a lot of videos. So this was my first sock knitting experience. So I watched a lot of videos to learn about different types of techniques, learn about how to make them fit and adjust the fit if needed. The things that I learned that I found most useful is first to figure out size. In the Summerly Designs pattern, she recommends measuring the widest part of your foot just below your toes and have that be the have that determine the circumference of your sock. And so I have pretty wide feet, and when I did that, and I first cast it on, I believe the 72 stitch sock, and I tried on the little leg part on my ankle, and it was just way too big, and it was sliding off. And then I read that according to Roxanne Richardson, she actually recommends that if your foot is much larger, much wider than your ankle, that you measure your ankle circumference and then take 90% of that, because socks should really have a 10% ease. And so based on my ankle circumference, I really should have casted on the 64 stitch sock. Well, actually, so I thought I would do that, but then since I never knitted a sock before and I knew my feet were a bit wide, I thought maybe I'll make like a schmedium type of sizing, because I usually am a schmedium between a small and a medium. And so I actually decided to cast on 66 stitches at the cuff. And that worked out fine for me, except the one thing that was a little bit different is when you're doing the heel. If you had a 64 stitch sock, you would be knitting the heel over 32 stitches. And I used a heel stitch, so it's like slip one, knit one, and you need an even number for that. So that works if you had half of 64, which is 32, still an even number. But because I cast it on 66, half of that is 33, and 33 is not an even number. So I needed an even number to knit the heel stitch. So I ended up knitting the heel over a little bit more than half the stitches. So it was 34 stitches for the heel, and then the front had 32 stitches. So it's just 2 stitches difference, and I don't think it causes the sock to be shaped weird or anything, so it worked out okay. But maybe that's just a note that you can consider if you're adjusting the stitches, the stitch count for your sock, to choose a number that's divisible by 4 and not just divisible by 2, which is what I did. Something else I want to say about knitting a sock as a noob is that first I'll say for the heel, I wanted to make sure that the heel fits my foot. And I know there's a couple of things people do. I had read this when I was researching, but some people do a square heel to make sure it fits most people. And you can also kind of measure the distance between the middle of your ankle bone, from the middle of your ankle bone to the floor, and have that be the length of your heel. And so I measure that, and it basically agreed with what the pattern said, but I did make that measurement to make sure the heel of the sock would fit my feet. And then I also was reading about a technique to avoid weaving in as many ends as possible. So I think it shows up better on this other sock. But this, again, is a Roxanne Richardson technique video, which I will link. And what that does is, normally you would pick up stitches after you knit the heel in the contrast color. You would pick up the stitches along the heel using your main color, which for me is this tonal orangey color. And obviously you have to cut the yarn and there's going to be an end. But what Roxanne Richardson shared in her video is that you can avoid cutting the main strand of yarn and basically use the contrast color to pick up one of the sides of the heel flap so that you kind of get to that beginning where your main strand is still attached, and then use your main strand from that point onwards so that you basically don't have those ends to weave in because you never had to cut the contrast yarn. I'm not sure if that made total sense, so I'll link her video so that you can watch if you're interested. And after trying that technique on one sock, I think it is, nice that I had to weave in fewer ends, but it did take a little bit of mental gymnastics, probably because it was my first time doing it, to make sure I still kind of do my pickups correctly. And as she also notes in the video, the main difference is that on one side of the heel, you have the pickup stitches with the main strand of yarn, but on the other side, there's a tiny little bit of a tiny column of stitches that are actually the contrast yarn. So there's these tiny little white stitches here, which I'm not sure if you can see. And generally, if you're wearing the sock, you really can't tell. So I don't think that's really a huge deal. But I'm not sure if I would bother doing this in the future, just because in the end, weaving in 2 additional ends is not the end of the world. It's not too hard to do. But I wanted to share that in case you were interested in avoiding weaving ends, in case you just really don't like doing that, which I know it's no one's favorite. The other mistake that I had made in my first sock was with a gusset. So I have, when I was reading the pattern, I was also watching other YouTube videos. So I watched the Earth Tones Girl No Fear sock knitting video series, which I thought was really useful just to see how sock knitting is done. But I think I had watched so many videos on different heel constructions just because I was curious that when I got to the gusset, I was like, okay, you're just decreasing for gussets. How hard could that be? And I must have skipped a section in the School of Socks sock pattern because I didn't realize that you're putting on 2 stitch markers and making a gusset decrease on both sides of the sock. I'll show it on this one. So you have a gusset decrease on this side of the sock and also a symmetrical one on the other side. I think because I missed the part where you're putting on 2 separate stitch markers, I thought that you're just, making a decrease on this end, knitting all around until the beginning of round and making a decrease on the other side. So I just had like a double thick gusset on one side of the sock. And even as I was knitting it, I was like, this can't be right. Like, wouldn't the sock be twisted? And I thought, okay, I'll just trust the process. So I knit the full sock and tried it on. And I was like, okay, it's a little bit weird that the gusset is on one side, but this, it's probably okay. But then I ultimately decided to watch some more videos about how the gusset is made and realize like, oh, oops, of course that's not right. The sock is pretty twisted. And I will also say that School of Socks makes it very clear in her video as well. I think I just neglected to watch it. So again, that's on me. It's not on the pattern. So then I thought, okay, I knit the second sock and I knit it correctly. And I was debating whether to fix the first sock, but I think maybe evidenced by my whole like matching my sleeve stripe pattern endeavor that I am apparently the kind of person who feels like I have to fix my sock. And so I had considered, unraveling the sock from the toe all the way down to the heel so I can reknit the gusset. But then I was like, I don't really want to reknit the whole foot and toe section, especially because I had already started weaving in the ends. And so I decided that this is a good opportunity for me to practice Kitchener grafting. So I've seen people do this where if they knit a sleeve of a sweater too long or too short, but they don't want to reknit the ribbing, they would basically pick up stitches along one row and then to keep the live stitches in check and then cut the row below so that you can kind of detach this half of the sweater from this half. And then you can add rows or unravel rows and then just attach them together at the end using Kitchener grafting. And I thought that it may be a little bit ridiculous to do that to a pair of socks, like a pair of vanilla socks. But I was like, at least this will be a good opportunity for me to practice the technique. And so that's what I did. I took one of my needles. I actually did on this sock, which is unblocked. So it's a bit less pleasant to show, or less pleasant for you to see, I suppose. But I'll just show you here. What I did is I found the section just below the gusset, the incorrect gusset of the previous version of this sock. And I weaved in a cable needle all around the sock. So that's below the section that I need to remove. And then I also weaved in another cable needle above the gusset section, which will keep the live stitches from the rest of the foot of the sock intact and put that on hold. And then I just snipped the little row below, unpicked that, and then I reknit the gusset section. Knitting the gusset section anew was pretty simple now that I know the correct way to do it. I will say that when I was unraveling, I did kind of make more than one snip so that instead of having a nice yarn tail for the row that I cut for this, top section that I wanted to keep, I cut the stitch so close to the end of the row that there was no yarn tail. And so in order to secure that, I ended up having to tink back just one row so that I could have a yarn tail to weave. It was okay in the end. I just knitted the gusset section. I just knitted an extra row from the gusset section after I finished the gusset and then grafted that way so that the length remained the same. The grafting was actually a lot more straightforward than I thought it would be because I've already done, the Kitchener graft at the toe of the sock, which is where I first learned the technique. I did find it pretty difficult to fix mistakes, at least at first. So if I realized that there was a hole in the grafting and I had to go back, it was a bit difficult for me as a person new to the technique to figure out where I can kind of go back to and when I should start the 4-stitch sequence. But eventually I did figure that out, and I think once I just had to undo the whole graft and start fresh because it was easier to just start from the beginning with the setup stitches. One thing that I have heard people talk about when they are doing the grafting technique is that if you pull too tight, there can be a scar in the fabric. And I saw a video by Wendy Poole, which I'll also link down below, where in her technique, she actually leaves so much slack in the grafting stitches, like a ridiculous amount of slack that you would not want in your final project. And then at the end, after you've finished threading the grafting through, you go back and tighten each of those stitches after the fact to make sure the tension matched. So I thought I wanted to try that to make sure I'm not pulling too tight. After I did that, and I know it's hard to see anyway because this is a variegated yarn, but the graft is so seamless. Like, it is really, really barely visible, even if I kind of truly examine it. And if you run your hands over, you can like kind of feel where the scar is, but it is really, really not noticeable. So I definitely recommend checking out that technique to tighten the stitches after you've grafted everything if you're struggling with too tight of a tension for your Kitchener graft. So that was a lot of work for a vanilla sock, I know, but it was my first time and I definitely learned a lot. Originally, I didn't feel that interested in knitting socks. I was like, well, it's so many stitches using a fingering yarn, like they're just socks. But after I've knit this one, I truly can appreciate how nice these handmade socks are. And they're super, super warm as well. So even after I had knit my first like botched sock, I was wearing that on one foot while I knit the other sock, just being like, oh, I can't wait to have a full pair. So I really enjoyed this, and I've gotten more sock yarn to knit more socks. So there likely will be more socks on this channel. That's probably what happens to everyone, right? You feel like, oh, maybe I probably won't knit socks, and then you knit one sock and you're hooked. So that's definitely what's happened with me, and I'm not mad about it. All right, so now my next finished object is these mittens. I'll put them on. They are the Better Together mittens. They look like this. I knitted these in Cascade 220 Superwash Merino Sport. That's a mouthful for a name. And the color is called Iron. It is a sport weight, whereas the pattern originally called for, I believe, fingering weight wool with a strand of mohair. So I just knitted it with a thicker strand. The gauge wasn't quite what the pattern called for, and they had two sizes, a women's size and a men's size. I needed the women's size measurements, and so I sized up to the men's size in terms of stitch count. That resulted in the women's size in terms of measurements. I was debating a couple of different patterns, so I really, really wanted a pair of warm and cozy mittens because when you're walking around outside and your hands are cold, I kind of just like turtle them back into my sleeve, but I think it would just be nice to have like basically little sweaters for your hands. That's kind of what I see them as. This yarn I had not gotten yet during my last episode, but as soon as I got it, I was like, I'm going to cast on some mittens. And I had been debating between this pattern or the arched gusset mitten from Pearl Soho, but ultimately I think just this ribbing detail won me over to this pattern, which I'll link below. The cuff is twisted rib, and then you follow a chart to get this section along with doing the thumb increases, and then the rest is obviously just stockinette. I really wanted a rounded mitten just because I think it's like a traditional looking mitten as opposed to a wedge toe type of mitten that's more trapezoidal. And blocking that was absolutely key. I did wear it a couple of times without blocking just because I was so excited to wear it. But if you don't block it, at the round, you kind of cinch it in with decreases. But if you don't block it, it's kind of like if you have a rucksack and you just cinch in the top, like everything was like super baggy and floppy. But after I, laid it flat to dry, I think the shape is quite nice. Yeah, I think it was a really quick knit. The chart was clear and easy to follow, but it did take me like maybe half of the first chart to feel like I can intuit what's happening next versus having to like really, really closely look at the pattern. I definitely still referenced the chart the whole time, but it became easier to follow such that when I knitted the second mitten, it was a breeze. So I definitely would recommend this pattern. It was a pretty fun knit, and I'm just like so happy to have these. I feel like little bear paws. Yeah, these are the Better Together mittens. And this transitions me to my first whip because it's made from the same yarn. I had bought 3 skeins of this Cascade 220 thinking that it would be really nice to be able to knit a little set. And so the next piece in my set is the cabled headband. And it looks like this. For now, it's a work in progress, so there's a lot of stuff dangling off of it. First, I'll say there's obviously a lot of different headband patterns out there, and when I was deciding what kind of headband I wanted, I did look a little bit into the different types of construction. I decided I wanted a double layered headband, which typically is knit by making a tube. So you cast on in the round, and then you just kind of knit in a circular pattern all the way down to make the headband. And I also wanted a little bit of visual interest beyond just, like a plain tube that's seamed together. And the really common one that you see a lot, both in patterns and also just in like store-bought headband, is that signature twist. I'm not sure how else to explain it, but I think you make it by folding in one end in half, folding in the other end in half, sandwich them together, and then sewing it. And then when you open it, there's that twist. I've also seen something like the Easy headband from Sari Nordland. It looked like the whole tube is twisted. I don't have that pattern, so I don't know exactly how that's done, but it's what it looked like to me in the photos. And I also found this other pattern called the cable headband. It's a free pattern on Ravelry, and it has this type of a twist, which I really was excited to try. It was the one that I in the end picked. It's a free pattern, so I can share a little bit about the construction, but the way it's worked is you knit your tube, and then when you get to this point, you put half of these stitches on hold, and then you continue this smaller tube. And when you get to a certain length, you can come back and knit the other tube. And when both are the same length, you kind of, you cross them, and then you join them in the round and just continue knit in the round, and then ultimately you can kind of seam these together. I thought this was like a neat way to do a twist without having to, like, I was just worried that the other twist would be too bulky. So I guess like this, can't really try it on, but like this is what it would ultimately look like. I did choose to do a provisional cast on at the beginning because the pattern offers an option to do long tail cast on, but then you have a seam and you just sew it back together. And I figure I just do the provisional cast on. I assume you would just Kitchener graft it together. I haven't read that part of the pattern yet, but I assume that's what you would do to get a pretty seamless join towards the end. There's obviously a lot of methods to do provisional cast on, and I've tried a few. The one I did this time is by, again, Roxanne Richardson. She has this crochet cast on method that she calls the Swiss Army knife of cast on methods, because you can use it for a lot of different types of cast on, including provisional cast on. And of the couple of techniques I tried, I really liked this one. It is pretty unfussy and unfiddly. You, in the end, get this lifeline. So you can use waste yarn or project yarn. I just use project yarn. So all of these stitches at the cast on edge are live stitches that are caught onto my lifeline over here. I didn't have any issues with like losing a stitch at the end or anything like that. So I would definitely recommend that, and I'll link this video below as well. So yeah, this should turn out to be pretty quick and easy. I used, I think a little over 1 or 1 1/4 skeins for the mittens. I think this would take probably like 1 skein-ish. I guess I'm not really sure how long this would take yet, how much yarn this would take yet, but I really hope I have enough left to also make a little Sophie scarf. I would be super delighted to have like a set with the same fabric for a headband, mittens, and a little tiny scarf. So stay tuned on that. I'll let you know if I'm able to do that. All right. So my next whip, is something I showed last time already. It is the Ingrid Sweater by Petite Knit. It is knitting for olive heavy merino in the color light cognac. The last time I showed this, I had knit kind of the back yoke. So I knitted this section up to maybe here on just the back, or maybe here on just the back. And since then I've knitted the shoulders, the front yoke, and then joined in the body and almost finished the body. So I started the very bottom ribbing section, and I think I need a couple more, maybe like another inch or so of ribbing before I can, finish the body. Yes, I talked a little bit about this pattern already in my last episode, and this is such a popular pattern, and I definitely want to echo what everyone else is saying, that this is just such a fun knit. It looks complicated, but it's really not that complicated. Although I said that last time, but then I was thinking that I should caveat that by clarifying that like each individual technique is not that hard. I guess just keeping track of your patterns. I feel like that's kind of the part that's challenging, because when you break it down to the most basic parts, it's like knits and purls and I guess a German short row turn or something like that. And like increases. So I guess, yeah, there's a couple of basic techniques, but stringing them together, you know, it's kind of a matter of, I guess, paying close attention to your pattern. So yeah, I mean, there were certain parts I had to frog back a little bit because like if my stitch count didn't match up, I have to go back and fix it. But overall, I think this has been a really fun experience. I was gonna say I didn't make too much progress on it, but I guess I did knit most of the body. But I just, you know, spent a lot of time knitting like my socks and my mittens and my headband, just because I was so excited to have these little winter accessories that I didn't really focus on this one. But I want to finish this one soon because I'm excited to be able to wear it. So we'll see. We'll see if I get distracted by like socks and things like that during the next couple of weeks. I guess this is pretty close to the Ingrid slipover. That's what this pattern would be if, you know, there were no sleeves, I suppose. So I'll keep you updated on this one. I love the color, love the pattern. Very excited to have this sweater. All right. So the next finished object before I go into acquisitions is not knitting. So I'm gonna like just sneak that in case any of you are interested. It's actually this little Santa hanging in the back. It is a crocheted hanging. And the story behind that is last Christmas, I made a couple of these using the weaving technique. So you take a loom and you put on warp threads, which are vertical threads, and then you go over and under to kind of make the background. I'll insert a picture of some of the weavings I made last year. And I made 3 last year by the weaving method, and I gave them all away to friends and family. And then earlier this month, we were visiting some of these recipients of these hangings, and when we went over, they had already decorated for Christmas, like put up their Christmas trees and put up their cute little knickknacks. And I saw that they also put up the little Santa and gnome hangings that I had given them in the previous year. And it just made me so happy to see that something I made, like with my hands, is now being displayed in their homes and kind of bringing, some joy and some warmth to their decor. So I was, really, really happy to see that. And also I was like, I kind of want one of these too, because I didn't make one for myself. And I decided to try to crochet one instead of weave one because I thought it might be a little bit faster. With weaving, you have to like do the warp, and there's some finishing techniques. Do the warp threads. Do the warp sounds like a weird like dance move or something. But you have to warp the loom, and then you also have to do some finishing techniques that are pretty critical for weavings. And you kind of have to like weave in the top so that it doesn't just come loose. And so I figured crocheting might allow me to save some time. I didn't use a pattern, although I did see some tutorials for similar types of hangings, and I can link one of those below. They actually provide stitch counts and things like that. But, when I made the weavings, I also just kind of eyeballed it. It's pretty simple shapes, and so I just kind of eyeballed the red sections and the white sections to make the hat. I used wool roving to make the hat brim and also to make the beard sections, and I attached the fringe at the end. And I took a couple of pine sprigs from a garland that we had and popped that into the brim. For some of the gifts I made, I also put like a little acorn or something like that, which I might go try and forage for an acorn and put that on there. So yeah, I think ultimately the crocheting part, I think it was faster. Like I really cranked this one out. To be honest though, this was kind of a product knit or product crochet as opposed to a process crochet. My partner and I were just decorating for Christmas, and I really, really I just kind of wanted to have this up on the wall. So I just sat down and on the floor and just cranked through it. And at first I wasn't super sure about the way it looks because I was so used to the weaving look. And I think I do like that a little bit more, but this definitely was faster to make. So I don't regret choosing to crochet it. For the materials, I used all craft yarn that I had in stash. So back in my weaving days, I had gotten a lot of really chunky yarns on sale or clearance at Michael's. It didn't really matter. It's not like knitting a garment where you wanted it to be a specific gauge, to be a specific material, to be like comfortable on your skin. I just wanted it to look cute and have enough colors that I can like mix and match them together. So I just have a lot of random craft yarns. A lot of them are really chunky. Yeah, if you're interested in hearing more about that, just let me know. And I think it adds a lot to our decor, so I'm very happy to have that. That's all that I have for finished projects and whips. Now I'm going to get into acquisitions. And I have some that I consider pretty exciting. So I already shared 2. It was the sock yarn, the knitted Wit Sock yarn that I used to make my socks, and then the yarn for my mittens. So that's already 2. I also have a couple of other finds from that sale section haul from my local yarn store. They're more like single skeins. You know, when in the sale section, there's usually not a whole lot of one skein. It's like the final few skeins. So the first thing I got is this Shibui Knits Haven. The composition is 80% extra fine merino and 20% cashmere, and this color is caper. So it is just so soft. I think I originally got this to make mittens. I got 2 50-gram balls. I believe these are 50 grams. Let me check. Yes, they're 50-gram balls, and they're a DK weight. I originally wanted to use this to make mittens, but I actually am pretty happy with my brown color mittens. I'm not sure if I really need 2. So now I'm actually a little bit up in the air about what to make with this. I'm considering a hat, if this is a good color for a hat, but let me know if you have other suggestions. It feels really soft though, so I think it would be a good little accessory. And this is the second one. This is also a Shibui Knits Haven. It's not yet wound into a cake. It's in the color Paprika, I believe. Yes, Paprika. And honestly, I just like really love this color. I'm not totally sure what I'll make with it. At first when I saw it, I thought maybe a headband, but again, I'm making that brown colored headband set, so I'll have to decide what to make. Honestly, I typically don't buy yarn without knowing what I want to make with it, because I'm just... Honestly, like having yarn in stash a little bit stresses me out, because I feel like I should make it into something and then it feels like it's too much to do. But I figured like, you know, a 50-gram ball is enough to make some little accessory, like even a Sophie scarf. That's what I was thinking. If I don't know what to make, I'll just make a Sophie scarf. If I have too many Sophie scarves, I could always gift it. So that's kind of why I justify getting this as well. But yeah, it's super soft, so I think whatever it is, it would be really nice. And the last kind of sales section haul is this Malabrigo Caprino in the color lettuce. It is also a DK weight, 80% superfine merino, 20% cashmere. So the same composition as the Shibui Knits Haven. And it is a gorgeous color. It's not variegated, but I think there is like some... It's not just one color. It's not a flat color. That's what I'll say. It's really, really gorgeous. And I normally don't go for colors like this. It's pretty like bright and vibrant. But I was also thinking like it'd be a nice headband, a nice Sophie scarf. So yeah, I'll see what I'll do with it. But these are kind of my winter accessory yarns that I now just have in stash. The other acquisition I have is more sock yarn. So this is like a bag of Filcolana Arwetta. It's a pretty popular sock yarn. I think it's 80-20. Yep, 80% superwash merino and 20% nylon. I got these colors primarily because I wanted to make the Ovis socks. I had seen that Madison Montees on YouTube had made some Ovis socks, and they were absolutely adorable. They have like little sheep on the cuff and a color work design in the feet. So I was thinking to use this color for the cuff and the sheep, and then this color for the main body. I think this is called Dijon, and this one is called, I don't know the color actually. It doesn't say, it just has a number. It's 977, and I got this little black skein for, I think, the sheep. There's some sheep detail. Maybe the legs are black, so I got that as well. And I got more skeins of this like creamy color because I figured it's helpful to use as contrast colors, and maybe I'll make a full-on cream colored lace sock as well. So this is going to feed into my sock knitting ambitions. All right, so that's it today for acquisitions, and that is a wrap on my second episode. Yeah, I again would love to hear from you if you're interested in dropping me a comment. I try to respond to all the comments because I just really enjoy that community aspect of having a little knitting podcast. And if you like this video, I would really appreciate if you can subscribe. That would make me very happy as well. So yeah, that's it for today's episode. Thanks again for watching, and I will see you in the next episode, hopefully very soon.